Most mental tension doesn't come from what happens. It comes from how often the mind reacts. The mind is constantly responding to situations, to opinions, to small problems, to thoughts that appear without warning. Everything seems to require a reaction, and without noticing, you get involved in everything. You respond, you explain, you react. And the more you do this, the more active the mind becomes, more engaged, more alert, more overloaded, as if it never truly stops. Even in moments of silence, the mind continues, replaying conversations, revisiting situations, creating new responses, and this constant activity creates tension. Because the mind doesn't reset on its own, it continues. One reaction leads to another. One thought triggers the next. One situation keeps expanding internally, and even when the moment is over, the reaction is not. It stays active, repeating, reinforcing, keeping the mind engaged with something that no longer exists. And this is what creates continuous tension. Not the event itself, but the lack of pause after it. Not because life is always heavy, but because the mind never pauses. But over time, something becomes clear. Peace doesn't come from controlling everything. It begins when reaction slows down, because the problem is not what appears. It is the need to respond to everything that appears. The mind was trained to react, to interpret everything as important, to respond before observing, but constant reaction has a cost. It reduces clarity, it increases noise, and it keeps the mind in a continuous loop. And the more you react, the less space you have. Everything feels urgent, everything feels relevant, everything feels like it needs your attention. But when you begin to pause, even for a few seconds, something changes. You create space between the situation and your response. And in that space, there is choice. You begin to see that not everything requires your reaction. Not everything needs your involvement. Not everything deserves your energy. Some things can simply stop with you, without continuation, without conflict, without effort. And when this happens more often, the mind starts to slow down, the noise decreases, clarity begins to appear, and peace becomes possible. Not because everything changed, but because your response did. And the more this pattern repeats, the more automatic it becomes. The mind starts reacting before you even notice, before you can observe, before you can choose. And when everything becomes automatic, there's very little space left for awareness. And without awareness, there is no real control. Peace begins when you stop reacting, and over time, this becomes a different way of operating. Less automatic, more intentional, less reactive, more stable. Be prosperous from the inside out.